Welcome back. This is lesson 5, and lesson 4 was 20 minutes or less. Lesson 5 will not be 20 minutes or less. This is going to be a big lesson. And to begin the lesson, we are going to begin with a supplemental notes package. So when you go to the digital textbook and you go to lesson 5, there's 2 hyperlinks there. And the first one is for a main notes package. And this is 10 pages of notes on economics. And I would definitely recommend that you read this before our hangout, and this will help you get ready for next week's economics midterm. In class, I would have, printed this out for you, but we are in a new digital reality, so therefore it's all here for you in a nice digital document. So definitely take some time to read that over. Now, I'm going to assume you've read that over, and I'm going to go into lesson 5 into more detail. If you haven't read the main notes package yet, read it before you continue on with this video. So pause the video now, read over that notes package, and then jump into lesson 5 with me. So here we are with lesson 5, and our objectives is to apply liberalism and individualism now into economics. Our objective is to understand some key economic concepts like scarcity and basic economic questions. We want you to be able to leave here knowing more about the Industrial Revolution and some of the contrasting opinions about it and the legacies of whether it was a good thing or bad. And finally, we're going to talk about the struggle between labor and capitalists. Now, there's some great quotes here. One's from Martin Luther King about the primacy of economics. And even though MLK Jr. was not seen as an economist, he's a civil rights activist. He was definitely involved socially in changing the fabric of America. But when he says a person participates in this society primarily as an economic entity, that in and of itself, that sentence describes the significance of economics. Somewhere in your introduction on an economics essay, you need to establish why is this an important topic? Why is it important that we engage into a investigation into the ideal economic relationship between each other and between government? And MLK Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., says it best. A person participates in this society primarily as an economic entity. At rock bottom, we are neither poets, athletes, nor artists. Our existence is centered on the fact that we are consumers, because we must eat and have shelter to live. So if you write an economic essay in August, then in your intro, you need to establish the significance of finding a solution to the problem that the source is illustrating. Martin Luther King is telling us the significance of finding that solution. Now, no doubt the solution is going to involve different potential roles for government and individuals. And we have some theories presented here. Now, the ones presented to you, you can go back and reword and recapture and put this into your own essays. So if you're struggling with argumentation in essays, begin to collect these arguments that I have shown you here that are either pro-economic individualism or pro-economic collectivism. And from these arguments, you can find case studies, evidence that supports them, and now you have an essay. A guiding principle that government could well adopt in establishing control over the capitalist system, including industry, labor, and agriculture, would be that control is needed primarily where there is a conflict between private and public interest. In general, the profit motive on the part of individuals and industries has been in the public interest and has led to progress and economic growth. Government control is needed, particularly where the profit motive is distinctively contrary to the public interest. That could be your thesis statement. That could be your thesis statement in nearly every economic paper. And there's a lot of nuances. There's lots of levels of individualism and collectivism that you can unpack in your body, because you're not arguing an extreme position one way or the other. You're seeing the need for some individualism and some collectivism. It's a very rich thesis that you could be borrowing from. Here's another example. This one's a little longer, and it is going to help us a little bit more with maybe an A1. This would be much too long for an A2 prompt. A2 prompts are typically 1 to 2 sentences, most often 2. An A1 prompt could be this long. when you read it, try to use your A1 tools. When you read it, try to see if you can see the conflict between individualism and collectivism. Man can find meaning in life short only through devoting himself to society. So our lives are short, and our lives can only be meaningful if we devote ourselves to something beyond ourselves. If our life is going to have purpose, it needs to have purpose beyond the individual. So right in that first sentence, we can see that there's a promotion of collectivism, of looking after the common good, of having responsibility to each other. The economic anarchy of capitalist society, as it exists today, is, in my opinion, the real source of the evil. We see before us a huge community of producers, the members of which are unnecessarily striving to deprive each other of the fruits of their collective labor, not by force, but on the whole, in faithful compliance with legally established rules. So again, ladies and gentlemen, in order to elevate your writing, what does e-writing look like? This is e-writing. This is someone that is weaving argumentation with evidence, and they're letting their argument lead their writing. It's not here's a case study on everything I know. It's 1949. It's not a case study on everything I know in 1949 about economics. It's not stats for the sake of stats. It's here's my argument, and here's some evidence to further it. So, just some thoughts. Introduction to economic terms. If you haven't watched the Williams videos, you need to go back and watch them. That's why I put that clip in there again. Again, the logical pattern to success here is textbook first step, video second step, then you listen to my video third step, you work through these documents and the things I ask you to go back and do fourth step, and then we have our hangout together fifth step. And then after the hangout, you can go back and review the things that don't make sense. So I've gone through this next topic for you, an introduction to economic, and there's a Prezi, but I've pulled some notes from the Prezi. Feel free to go through the Prezi, because then I'll get more hits and I'll pretend I'm a superstar. But the main important parts of the Prezi have been captured here for you. So if we were in class, the first thing I'd be talking to you about is, what is the one thing that all economic systems share? And because of this, we need economics, right? Why do we need an economic system? And that one thing is scarcity. If we had no scarcity, if I could go outside and just pick a Porsche 911 off the ground, then I wouldn't need to have a Porsche dealership. If they just existed in nature, if I could think things into existence, if I could just go to a machine and say tea Earl Grey hot, then I wouldn't need to go to the grocery store and buy my tea. I don't drink tea. But ladies and gentlemen, we have scarcity. We have a limited amount of water. We have a limited amount of oil. We have a limited amount of coal and the building blocks of society. And even if oil is the lifeblood of the modern society, it is running out. And because it's scarce, we must have an economic system that decides how are we going to be using that commodity. Why do we have a gap in wealth? Why do we have some who are rich and some who are poor? Well, we often use the terms have and have not. That is scarcity. So we have some photos here to show you scarcity. Here's a wealthy shopper, and here's a man who's down on his luck. That is scarcity. So we have nearly unlimited wants. Hopefully there is some limit to our wants, but when you add them up and complicate the fact that we have, billions of people on the planet, it does seem like unlimited wants, and we do have limited resources. There is a finite amount of oil. So combine those two factors, it leads to scarcity. And because of scarcity, we have choices to make. What should we produce? How should we produce it? And for whom are we making this? And the way we answer those questions will expose our values. And it'll expose what we believe to be the role of government and the role of citizens in society. And it'll show us our ideology. Are we individualist or collectivist? So for example, in a free market, the answer is, what should we produce? Producers will create things that they think will be profitable. In a free market, if I make, this isn't mine, but blueberry pomegranate sparkling water, if I'm in the business of making this, and I've made a few million cans of this and they are still sitting on the shelves unsold, I need to change. Maybe we also make 7-Up, and 7-Up we can't keep enough 7-Up in the store. 7-Up, as soon as it's in the store, it's bought. So maybe in a free market, producers should be making more 7-Up than this AHA, whatever that is. So seeking a profit in a free market, that should answer what to produce. What do we produce? What consumers demand. Sometimes producers in a free market will create demand. They'll try to manipulate consumption through advertisement. In a command economy, how would Stalin in the USSR decide what to produce? Well, he has a central planning committee, Gosplan, who will answer that question. What should we produce? In order for Stalin, he looked around his Soviet Union and he decided we are, 50 to 100 years behind the great nations of the world. We must make good this lag in 10 years or be crushed. How are we going to make good the lag? We need to focus on industry and military. So for him, what to produce meant industry and military so that the Soviet Union could survive. In a pure Marxist sense, what should be produced should be what the people need. So one way to discuss what to produce, we often use the term guns or butter. Should we be producing things that serve a military purpose, guns, or should we be producing things that are a consumable purpose, butter? And how much of each? Now, those are some basic economic ideas. Now we're going to go into an economic case study. An economic case study is the Industrial Revolution. We don't want you to spend time memorizing, who created what, who created the spinning jenny. And tell me the story of how, that invention changed farming. That's exciting. And we all need farmers. We all eat breakfast every day. We should thank a farmer for it. But at the same time, in order to really unpack the debate between individualism and collectivism and the role of government, we need to focus on the Industrial Revolution and how it changed society for the good and for the bad. I've got some notes to share with you here. The good side, the capitalist in me says, it's pretty obvious. The Industrial Revolution is good because of the economic growth, the unprecedented economic growth that was created through the Industrial Revolution, that it unlocked human potential at a rate that had never been seen before in history. It has led to cheaper consumer products. So before, there were some items that could only be affordable to the ultra elite, to the nobles. And now, because of the Industrial Revolution, we've created this mass consumption society, and we have driven prices down. Eventually, the Industrial Revolution will increase the standard of living. It will lead to faster transportation. Population will grow. Population will double every 50 years after the Industrial Revolution. Urbanization is an outcome of the Industrial Revolution, and with that comes, mass education and mass health care. Faster communication, technologies will advance. We do have, and now this is where you'd bring up the spinning jenny, but just in passing, we do have decreased production times. The mechanization, division of labor, and specialization of labor has greatly increased efficiency. For example, with the aid of a spinning jenny, one worker could replace 50. Capitalism reflects nature. It's the survival of the fittest. It will decrease the amount of death. I mean, what better way to judge a system than, are the people thriving? As a result of worker oppression, the Factory Acts, so that's kind of a negative thing, right? It did have some worker oppression in the beginning, but as a result of that oppression, the Factory Acts of 1833 will spark government regulation of the labor market by creating minimum wage, maximum hours, minimum ages at work, and some environmental regulation. So although there is a negative side to the Industrial Revolution early on, as a response to that negative side, we see growth in human rights and labor rights. It'll inspire new ideologies like socialism and communism that will address the concerns of workers. And we will see massive wealth creation at a private and national level. All right, but there's a bad side. For the bad side, you can go back to Social 10 and you can talk about, related issue 3 and the viability of this paradigm. You can talk about, the death of birth and all of those ecological realities that are a consequence of our economic footprints. But we have some more historic examples here. So there were many industrial accidents. For example, the Fallon Colliery disaster where 100 workers were killed as young as age 8. We have pollution. For example, the Great Smog of London killed 4,000. We even had the negative side of the Industrial Revolution is that it has been able to, through the Industrial Revolution, create some new products, commodities that haven't necessarily made the world a safer or better place. So through the Industrial Revolution, we have mechanized warfare, and we've created things like the Gatling gun that creates or fires 900 rounds a minute. And the bloody consequences of that can be measured in the American Civil War. The Industrial Revolution led to long work hours, the exploitation of children. Children will be separated from the families. And in a 20th century application in the Industrial Revolution in Pakistan, we see the death of Iqbal. Iqbal was a child worker at a carpet factory in Pakistan. He was freed by the NGO Free the Children, and while he's riding his bike home from school one day, the carpet mafia had him assassinated. So when we have child workers being stolen from their families, being freed, and then being assassinated by groups of people like the carpet mafia, you can see an ugly side of the Industrial Revolution. We're going to lose a lot of that common land, a lot of that agrarian society that existed before that was very comfortable will be lost forever. Here's a cartoon that is looking at that debate between guns and butter. So the government has a plate, and in it there's some signs of weapons like tanks and airplanes, and you have a family that are starving, that they're in hunger. You have citizens that are in desperation and need freedom through government. They need modern liberalism, but the government, instead of providing social safety net, instead of providing, hot lunches and hot breakfasts and redistributing wealth to those in need, they're spending that wealth that the government has collected on weapons. So this is a cartoon that is asking the government to de-emphasize the overproduction of guns at the expense of butter. Here's a quote from your grade 10 curriculum in the Industrial Revolution, but it's in our textbook this year in Social 30, so maybe you remember reading it. And it really captures the significance of the Industrial Revolution, the most far-reaching, influential transformation of human culture since the advent of agriculture 8 or 10,000 years ago. The consequences of this revolution would change forever human labor, consumption, family structure, social structure, and even the soul and thoughts of the individual. That if you're writing an essay about the Industrial Revolution and you need to sell us on what is the significance of it, boom, there it is. Here's some other links that you can go to learn more about the Industrial Revolution, but I've pulled some ideas out of them. Here's some more of the good side and the bad side of the Industrial Revolution. And here's some of the social stuff about the Industrial Revolution. So some of the positive sides will be this urbanization, which will lead to national and municipal parks and museums and hospitals and government services. But on a negative side, and try to capture the language here. On a negative side, traditional social values will be weakened. A sense of belonging and shared communal history will be lost. We'll have weakened family ties with each other and with the church. We'll have a lot of children that are abandoned or become runaways. That the elderly will lose their privileged status because they're seen as a burden. Social divisions will widen between the rich and the poor. The workers will be living in slums, and in these slums there'll be outbreaks of disease like cholera. Children will be paid very little compared to adults, so that they'll be able to be manipulated, and therefore these children, because they're malleable, they will be beat into being basically slaves to the industrial process, and they will be robbed of their childhood. So as a result of all this negative stuff, there will be some reforms, and reforms through groups like the Chartists. And here's an example of some of the reforms coming up. So in 1833, the Sadler Report documented the poor social conditions in Britain, and they found evidence of human rights abuse, terrible working conditions, and suggested reforms to avoid social unrest. So because the market free of government has created abuse, now there's a need for government to respond. Individualism is freedom from government, right? But now, through the Sadler Report of 1833, specific evidence, they're suggesting that because we've created an economy based on freedom, it has led to human rights abuses, terrible working conditions, and therefore to avoid social unrest, unless we want to see a socialist or a communist revolution in the streets, we need to respond. And these are the responses. So a whole list of acts, some before the Sadler Report, some after the Sadler Report, on how to better regulate the marketplace to take away some of that human rights abuse. If you're going to see these acts on a multiple choice test, the information would be in the source. These acts are there to add to your writing, to add to your understanding of the Industrial Revolution and how the government was forced to respond to some of that human rights abuse. All right. Next up would be this idea of a conflict between labor and the capitalists. And we have some cartoons that help unpack that. So big business, the capitalists, they're often seen as robber barons, as individuals who are robbing wealth from the laborers. And it's this distance between the owners of the factories and the workers that will lead to the communist movement. Here you have a very graphic cartoon where the only promise that capitalists are giving to the workers would be a 54-hour work week and low wages and ultimately death. And these individuals are forced to go and work in the mine. Because the workers face such long hours and low wages, we'll see them unionize. That there'll be strength being a collective. And that's what this one's showing. That individually they are subject to the tyranny of capitalism, but together unions can alter the bargaining with the capitalists because they can hold up the industrial process. So you may end up seeing some cartoons such as this on your diploma exam, and then you'll have to slow down and look at it and say, what's the ideological perspective here? What is the problem that the cartoonist is trying to expose, that society has? And is it a problem because we have too much individualism or too much collectivism? Which principle of individualism or collectivism are they trying to illustrate? And what is the solution that we can infer that those within the cartoon are wanting, that the cartoonist is wanting? And then if it's an historical cartoon like this one is, it's more than 100 years old, we can then ask the question, to what extent has this solution happened? Looking at the world of 2020, to what extent would this cartoonist be pleased with the new reality? And we've got lots of cartoons. So take some time, look through the cartoons, see if you can see those ideological perspectives, practice sharpening your A1 skills, because we have an A1 exam next week. This is a great one. Non-union working man, and this guy, compulsory unionization, takes away his lunch kit, takes away the right to work. What is this cartoon? This cartoon is an anti-union cartoon. This is a cartoon that is rejecting that forced group identity. So again, I suggested in the previous videos, I'm not going to give you just sources that promote capitalism or just sources that promote socialism. I'm going to give you a mix. So this one, anti-union. This one's pro-union. This one also pro-union. Better working conditions is the goal. Individual efforts, we can never actually reach that goal. So a non-unionist will forever be held back because on our own we can't achieve this. That the only way to achieve this is by working in combination with others. Here's a cartoon though that's very concerned that labor, once you unionize, then you'll strike and do walkouts. That'll lead to disorder and riots. Ultimately, the goal will be Bolshevism, and that'll lead to chaos in society. So this is an anti-union cartoon suggesting that with unions will come communism, and with communism will come chaos. Here's a great summary of the impact of liberalism over the last 150 years, and that might be a last thing for you to read over as we finish up this lesson, an introduction to economics.